Thank you, Governor. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session on developing students for the future of work. As Jane said, I'm Jean Eddy, President and CEO of American Student Assistance, and this is a topic that we spend a lot of time thinking about at ASA. Like all of you, I'm excited to hear the discussion that our speakers will engage in this afternoon. Our goal at ASA is to help students as early as middle school know themselves, know their options, and make informed choices to achieve their education and career goals. Today's middle schoolers are the workforce of 2030. We need to start talking to them now to help them discover their interests and aptitudes and to learn how those discoveries align with possible career paths. We also need to give them chances in high school to experiment with internships and work-based learning. I'm proud to say to you that you'll hear from some of our partners and grantees, as well as others in the field, about the creative work they're doing to introduce career exploration to students at an early age. I've had the pleasure of seeing some of these programs in action, including World of Work in Cajon Valley, California. These kids start learning about strengths, interests, and careers as early as kindergarten. I've been there, and believe me, it was a very impressive thing to witness. How's that, Ed? So now let's hear from the panelists themselves about the future of work. Here to moderate this discussion is a true leader and expert on the topic of education innovation, Tom Vander. As many of you know, Tom is CEO of Getting Smart, as well as a prolific writer and speaker. He served as the first executive director of education for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and was a public school superintendent in Washington State. Tom also co-founded the first education venture fund, Learn Capital. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Tom Vander. Tom, thanks so much.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Thanks for sticking around for the afternoon. We have a fun, interesting, we hope thought-provoking discussion for you. We're going to talk this afternoon about the future of work and how to get kids better prepared for what's happening. I want to spend the first 10 minutes with you talking about what's happening. Try to get at some of the underlying drivers that are changing the nature of work, how people work, where people work, why people work. And I hope we can uncover both those drivers that are really exciting and some that are simultaneously quite terrifying. Because I don't know about you, but I wake up most days confused about whether I should be terrified or thrilled about what's happening. When you turn on the news, you don't know if you're going to get the news about a brand new energy source that's going to save the planet, or if we started a war with another country, right? Every day is that strange paradox. So let's talk about some of the drivers that you've started to notice in the last 5 years that are changing why, where, how we work. And since Andrew Frischman is sitting right in front, Andrew's Big Picture Learning, what do you think about, that's a great suit. What do you think about, what's your headline driver?
I think the headline driver that I see is the way in which the jobs that are available and the kinds of careers have become much more fragmented, much more turbulent. Yeah. And it seems like the kinds of pathways that had existed to get into those predictable forms of work have gotten scrambled up.
Free agent and freelance.
Yeah.
Let me introduce some of my panel. Dr. David Blustein is a professor here at Boston College, and he's been there 20 years, and for the last 15 has really been recognized as the leader in the field of vocational psychology. He has a book that he wrote called The Psychology of Working. He has a new book out that we're going to talk about later on the importance of work in the age of uncertainty. Flyers are up here. You had a particular term for this, the freelance economy. What do you call it?
It's usually called precarious work.
Precarious work.
Yes.
Which is an interesting description, right? It's a little bit more descriptive than freelance. Why do you use that term or like that term?
Precarious work describes both the actual labor market being precarious as well as the psychological experience of feeling precarious, of feeling this sense of uncertainty. It's a term that was developed in Europe. In fact, there's a scholar, Guy Standing, who wrote a book called
this morning we talked about the fact that
Yes.
we're sort of lying to each other by talking about this 3% unemployment rate, because that doesn't really tell you what's happening in the economy and how many people feel precarious about the nature of their work, right?
Absolutely. That 3% unemployment rate is misleading from so many perspectives. Just very briefly, the labor market participation rate, which is a much better index of employment health in this country, has gone down 4% since 2007. So the nature of the jobs that people
Governor,
have are not the same.
We'll come back to you, David. You've run states and companies. What is one or two big drivers that you think are changing the nature of work?
So I think there are two things. First of all, the proliferation of information aggregation tools, so that huge masses of information can be sorted, and so different pieces of information that folks have. Cass Sunstein has written a really interesting book around that. Yeah. And then the ability of this data to be used in ways that policymakers can't even completely understand is fascinating.
I want to stop there. Art, we were talking about this at lunchtime. So we're teaching kids to factor polynomials, and we're teaching them long division, and instead we ought to be inviting them into big problems and the data set behind big problems, and invite them into modeling and data science. And today we can have kids, high school kids, using TensorFlow and PyTorch, open machine learning tools to take on some of the world's big problems. So,
but they also need to understand the policy, understand that enough so they understand the policy implications.
Good, thank you. All right, who else is a driver of the change of work? David, you're the tech dude at Big Picture. What would you add from a tech standpoint?
I think that precarious work environment that we're in, one of the things that we could be doing to buffer against that is helping young people build strong and diverse networks of social capital. So
let's have a moment for Julia Freeland Fisher, the Director of Education at Christensen Institute. Really helped a lot of us remember how important social capital is. You guys have been Big Picture has been the best example of helping kids build social capital, but super important insight. Thanks. Annabelle, you're Gene's partner, strategy partner at ASA. What do you guys see as a driver of the future work?
I think one of the things I find interesting is when you ask young people what they want to be, many of them want to be the boss and be the boss of themselves and sometimes be the boss of me, particularly if they're related to me. And I think that helping young people understand what the pathways are to being their own boss, to being entrepreneurial, and those skill sets, whether that seems very valuable to me, whether they end up running their own businesses or go into businesses. I think those are skills that we need to be really helping them get a hold of.
Meet Ed Hidalgo. Ed's the Chief Innovation Officer at Cajon Valley. Cajon Valley USD is just outside of San Diego. And as Gene said, they have the best career education in the world, and it's K-8 schools. So I just wonder, Ed, if you want to pivot off of that idea of kids beginning to imagine themselves as a CEO or an entrepreneur.
Well, we talk about it as students understanding their future possible selves and the importance of that starting early. So if a student can see their future self, if we can build their capacity to understand their unique strengths, interests, and values, every child unique and special, and we can help them make those connections to that career decision-making self-efficacy, there's a greater chance they'll want to stay in school, work hard in school, and that these elements of interest drive motivation, persistence, and vigor.
Yeah, see the possible selves is isn't that a cool way to put it, Annabelle? This morning, we did a podcast together, and Ed told me about a two-gen strategy that they have, where they're having these conversations with parents as well as kids. And many of these parents, they've never been asked to imagine a possible self that's different than their current life, right? So inviting both parents and kids into that conversation is really a beautiful thing. Yes? Another driver.
If we keep calling it the future of work, it gives people permission to keep putting it off. Yeah. It's not the future, it's now.
Yeah, thank you. It's very well put, because we're talking about stuff that's happening today, not in the future. I don't even like the idea of thinking about preparedness anymore. This is my new book that I finished last week. I got those editor comments back that I knew were coming. It's like, that was a really nice effort, but you'll enjoy rewriting your book.
Oh no, is it true?
But I guess our discovery as we've studied the future of work is that instead of thinking about education as a prophylactic for something that might happen 10 or 15 years from now, to invite kids into difference making today, right? For the reasons that you talked about, inviting them into big complicated problems and the data set behind those. So thank you. It's not the future of work, it's the nature of work. Jim, what are you thinking?
Thanks, Tom. I'll add a piece. The human element that is more important, especially with AI emerging, will be most important going forward. Yeah. What we're learning through learning science and cognition. So it's the idea of metacognition, and specifically understanding implicit bias and the importance of that.
Right. But being metacognitive both about yourself and your own biases, and then as we were talking about thinking about data sets behind big problems and what biases might sit inside the data sets that we're working with. Thanks. Alisa Wilke is the VP of Innovation at ASA. What kind of drivers of the future of work are you thinking about?
Well, ASA, our mission is really to help students discover themselves, like learn more about what their interests and passions are, and help them make good choices, largely about after they leave high school. And so the drivers are, they're very much, these students are already thinking about what their careers might be, and they want to take control of their careers. And we can enable them now to explore, what they're passionate about, and not just, hey, I'm good at math, so I better be an engineer. And so I think the drivers are helping them early on, connect their interests and passions with the jobs that exist today, because the reality is, that's the way they can get the hard skills. But kind of coming back to preparing for this precarious work environment or the gig economy where people are moving around, these students have to learn how to get along with each other, how to find how to find their first job, how to work in a team. Jobs aren't guaranteed for 40 years, so how are we able to help them starting young? In Ed's work, they start in kindergarten. A lot of ASA's work, we start in middle school, get them on project teams. And so it's really about connecting their interests with the world. And when you're in 6th grade, they need help. They need an ecosystem of folks that can help them do that.
Thanks. What haven't we talked about that's a driver?
Thank you. I think a driver is understanding what makes good and healthy work. What are people's rights?
David, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I think that's a very important issue, the issue of the quality of work.
Yeah.
There are a lot of jobs in the U.S. now, but a lot of these jobs are just not what we call decent jobs.
The last chapter in your new book is about helping more people have dignity and opportunity in your work. I get it's related to this idea, right? But it's expecting to have a work and a workplace that promotes well-being and dignity,
yes,
purpose, and a sense of opportunity, right?
Yes, absolutely, and a sense of social contribution. And the dignity issue is very important. It's actually been discussed a lot in the public sector, not discussed as much as it should be in the education and career development realms. Very important concept.
Andy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, not a new driver, but an observation about most or all of the drivers that have been surfaced for you. There's a dynamic, I think, running underneath all of this, which is that there are things that we all know, all of us, but maybe especially people in schools, where the things that we know as human beings about, how complicated it is to develop young human beings, and what 21st century skills should be like, and how important they are, and what powerful, deep learning looks like. Right. And yet, we all work inside of systems that have lost sight of those things. Right. And so there's a mental war happening between the impacts of those systems that insist that we behave a certain way, right, and what we really know as individuals.
Right. We're going to come back to that one in 3 or 4 minutes. Another driver, shout it out. You get a headline. Right. Headline, quick.
So the headline is, computer science is still not taken by 50% of
Okay. Right. So, all right. So my version of that headline is, every kid needs to understand the implications of machine learning and data science, even if they don't see themselves as a computer scientist, because it'll impact everything about how they live, learn, work, and play. We haven't talked about climate change yet. That strikes me as that's going to be one of the biggest drivers in the lives of young people for the next 30 years, both mitigation and adaptation. So how we invite young people into that conversation and make them partners in mitigation and adaptation feels like it's going to be a big driver. Yeah. Shout it out. A quick headline.
Everything we've talked about is very much in a U.S. context, maybe an OECD context. I'm struggling with a lot of the conversations we're having. You say, well, how do I translate to Central America? How do I translate to East or West Africa?
No, it's we're living through the rise of China right now, and by 2030, a third of the planet's going to live in Africa, right? And so much more we need to understand the global context and what that means for young people, because yes, thank you. Just as we wrap up this session on drivers, are there any that you've heard that you want to pivot on, to comment on, or build on?
I think contingent labor is a really interesting aspect. Microtasking, contingent labor, temp labor, flexible workforce. It's amazing how often I go out and speak to ed leaders, and they don't know what Upwork is. You know what Upwork is, right? But teachers don't know what Upwork is. So they still think that the students in their class are going to be competing against the students sitting on either side of them for a job one day. And there's this whole other environment through Upwork and TaskRabbit and Fiverr where you can source talent from anywhere in the world. And so how are we preparing students to compete in that environment? What is their brand? And that's why we take it back to the individual. Who are you? What are your strengths, interests, and values? To compete in the world of work is not what are you going to fit into, because there's lots of people who are going to find work that matters to them. What is the work that matters to you? And if it matters to you, then you're going to be willing to be a lifelong learner. You're going to activate your vigor and persistence to getting really good at it. And that's why we start with the human. To compete, to develop talent starts with the human. And those online platforms are going to be, I think, things that we're going to be competing with. Our kids are going to definitely be competing with.
All right, David, in 2 minutes or less, how would you recap this conversation of future work?
2 minutes or less.
Not future work, the nature of work.
I think a few points. The person who mentioned the future of work is here is spot on. I think people have been expecting this, robots and taking over everything. Robots have taken over a lot of jobs, but the future is here now. Huge wage compression, particularly among poor and working class people in this country. The advent of precarious work is is massively reshaping the United States and around the world now. And I do appreciate that comment about looking at this thing from a global perspective. So while people may think that the labor market in the world of work is healthy now because of the unemployment rate, in my book, which just came out, that is not the picture we saw. People have said to me, the book seems too depressing. It's not my fault. I'm a psychologist. I'm a scholar. I didn't want to make it depressing. I don't like that either. But one thing I will say is there's a lot that we can do, which we will talk about as this session continues.
All right, I want to pivot now and just talk about the implications for education and education entrepreneurs. So given the wonderful and complex and scary nature of work today, how might we better invite young people into that world? How might we better prepare them? Alisa, what do we do?
Well, we have to start now, and in our work, I think that at least in the classroom, there are quite a number of people ready to go. Teachers are ready to go. They're enthusiastic to introduce work concepts into their day-to-day. They believe it's their job. They believe that they can do it. They need help and they need resources, and it doesn't always necessarily mean money. It can mean they need some willingness from their administration to help them, like I say in product development, iterate and fail often and fast, right? So let the teacher try out that new 3D printer if they happen to have one in the classroom and solve problems with it right along with the students. And I think we need the community to come together and produce programming and resources for them. I don't think we could expect that 7th grade science teacher to come up with programming to explore science careers or even skills on their own. They need some of that help. And they absolutely react positively to third-party online resources if they're there. I mean, ASA, we're working on a number of those things. We've done a lot of videos. But when we asked the teachers, what would you like most? They're like, a place to send kids. When I can't help them in the classroom, where can I send kids? But we have to start now.
But a couple years ago, you guys moved down to middle school. Mm-hmm. Why is that the right place to start?
Well, Ed might argue it starts in kindergarten, which I'm not opposed to either. But we spent a lot of years helping college students and young people who had graduated and saw that they were really indebted and they made some really poor choices about where they went to school. We firmly believe that higher education is critical, but sometimes they were misguided. And the conversation about what do I want to be when I grow up was happening way too late. It was happening in senior year, and they were picking colleges first and majors second, and then maybe jobs. And whether or not they were a good fit or not, it was just because someone told them to. So we did a lot of thinking. Jean led us through that process, and we realized we have to go sooner. We have to help students understand their interests and values and catch them at that critical moment. Middle school is so critical, right? That's when you start to see students drop off in interest. That's when grades really happen. So those of you in the audience that are actually, teachers or practitioners, it's like that's when they get a real grade and they start to compare themselves to others. And you want to catch those kids and see that they have interests that somebody today quoted it might have been Andrew, that it's like, or I don't remember who at some point today said, it's like we're not teaching them to be good at school. We need to teach them to be good at life. Yeah. And that's the time to do it because they start to feel bad about themselves. So we thought really hard about middle school, focusing there, and also high school.
All right. I bring a lot of people to Cajon Valley, and because we can't hop on a bus and go visit Cajon Valley, I want to play this quick 3-minute video for you. It's going to be a quick video tour, and then Ed, you can explain what we just saw.
If we don't know who we are, then how do we know what job we want? Welcome to room 3. I'm Kylie. We're simulating the work of a dietitian as part of a World of Work project.
The World of Work initiative here at Cajon Valley is a program that focuses on students' strengths, interests, and values.
For these 3 days, World of Work is seeing what life is like for a dietitian to plan a party, as well as what it would be like for an actual party planner. They get to experience each of the RISEC letters in this activity.
As a realistic group, there is going to be hands-on and they're the doers. As investigative, their job is to do the research, plan the meal, and keep it under budget. As artistic, their job is to create the beautiful centerpiece for each table. This is social, and their job is to create the seating for everybody and see where they all go. Of course, as socials, they want to make sure everybody has a great time. This is the enterprising group, and they're the persuaders. Their job is to create the invitations and make sure they all show up. This is the conventional group. Their job is to calculate the cost of the food for the party. The part I love about World of Work is that you get to find any job you want and you can see what fits best for you.
Through World of Work, our students here at Cajon Valley are going to be able to be exposed to 54 different careers that otherwise they would have never known about.
We're doing the World of Work because it helps us discover who we are so we can discover our part in the world.
It's been super enlightening for me, and I think for them, and I couldn't be prouder.
Thank you, Mrs. Service, for taking your content area in math and decimals and fractions and incorporating that into a career and making this simulation so powerful for your students.
Since I know my strengths, interests, and values, I know I'll find the right job for me.
I think Kylie might have a future in broadcast journalism. Right? I love that kid.
Yeah.
Ed, what the heck was that?
I know.
What did we just see?
We're a 28 school district, 17,000 student public school district. We're one of the highest poverty school districts of all 43 districts in San Diego County. We serve 22,000 meals a day. And we've essentially taken vocational psychology and we've integrated into the classroom. Our teachers are career developers. They're integrating the language of John Holland's RISEC framework, the typology, not to typecast students, not to lock them into jobs. It's actually not about the job. It's about how the student feels doing the work as a dietitian and understanding and reflecting what are the strengths, interests, and values that someone in that role would need to deploy, and how did you feel as you were going through that process? We're building simulations. We want all children to explore a career, simulate, have an as-if experience. Great if it's a BPL experience where it's out in the world of work. I can't take all my students out yet to do that. Level 3, to meet a professional, ideally someone who looks like them that does the work. And then level 4 is to have a demonstration of learning. This was a RISEC party game activity where they get to assess and experience each of the RISEC theme areas and have another opportunity to claim, which was my top theme? Which theme did I enjoy the most? Which felt like me? We're not testing students. We're not giving them a RISEC themed assessment in K5. We're asking them to self-report and say, this is my theme. They're claiming it. It's the ultimate in student agency.
I was in a Cajon kindergarten, helping a kindergartner design a new elementary school using CAD software. I was in a Cajon 6th grade working with students that were doing a community-connected water quality project, and they were on NEPRIS with water engineers who were assessing the quality of the project work that they had just done. So we're not talking about a few videos that are added to the curriculum. We're talking about the curriculum. This work is embedded into the kindergarten through 8th grade curriculum. And what I love most is the amount of reflection that I see in Cajon kids where they're asking themselves, can I picture myself in this work? What am I getting good at? What do I really enjoy? So those cycles of reflection are really powerful. David, you've seen the work.
I've seen the work. I think I've actually seen that young student there.
Maybe so.
I was, as a vocational psychologist, somebody who's been in this field for decades. I teach about Holland's theory, which is the basis of RISEC. I would say Ed's work and the work of his team is outstanding. Ed is self-taught but extremely knowledgeable about vocational psychology, and the way he's implemented this has been amazing. The day I spent at Cajon Valley in October was so moving for me. 7 or 8 schools and seeing these kids get so engaged, and the teachers. And there was also a session for parents. And most of these parents had never had an opportunity to think about who they might want to be in the world. That was really, for me, like a culmination of seeing the work I've been so passionate about come alive in these schools. Very moving.
So Ed and David and I are going to do another breakout session after this. So if you want to go deep into their work, I would invite you to join us in that breakout session where you'll get a chance to do a deep dive. The last portion of our time together, I'm going to invite our panelists to give you some advice on what you should do next as an educator or an entrepreneur. What I might do is capture just a headline of a couple questions that they could incorporate into their work. So just headline questions that you'd love to have them. I'm not going to give it to you.
Okay. Those of us who have grown up in different countries have come to appreciate the liberal arts philosophy of American education, which has been the prime driver of American creativity, which you do not find in the third world or any other way. It seems to me the byproduct here is going to be a sacrifice of that liberal arts Renaissance person that we all have come to appreciate from American education, which is...
It's an awesome question. I hope one of you takes that on.
I could definitely respond
if there's
to that.
If there's an and both here, you got a question that you'd like one of them to address?
How do we make sure that the plumber stays as important as the global freelance worker? Because that party will fall apart when the plumbing doesn't.
Ed's having that conversation in Cajon. Headline questions?
So I want to address the future of work for the existing workers who are stagnant in their salary and who are not getting a career. What do you do about that?
So adult workers, we're working with Skill Rise and ISTE right now on this question of how do we better support adults. So, okay, another headline. Eileen?
What about the role of what used to be called co-curricular activities in students finding their purpose and passion?
Thank you. I love that question. Just thinking about band and art, right? I think those are some of the most valuable learning experiences that we have. I think it gets to this issue of the liberal arts, so that's a great question. One more? All right, some good headlines. Let me start with David. So you can respond to one or two of those and or try to give us some closing advice for what should educators do, what could entrepreneurs do?
Okay, I'll give some advice and we'll respond to that question. There were 3 recommendations I have for educators. One is to educate people, educate the whole person. So I don't think anyone up here is saying to focus only on career education. I agree the liberal arts, humanities, teaching people how to think critically is the bottom line of education. And one thing I've learned from one of my colleagues, Mark Savickas, a great colleague in our field, is we're entering an era where work is not always going to love us. We need to help people learn how to love each other and develop beautiful, meaningful, purposeful lives. So I feel very deeply about that, and no one here is trying to replace the liberal arts. We're trying to infuse, the second recommendation is to educate people for an uncertain world. And in order to do that, we do need to help people learn about the world. And I think one of the takeaways of the program in Cajon Valley is helping students to get engaged. People misconstrue it as forcing or encouraging foreclosure. That's not what it's about. It's really about student engagement. The latent purpose, the latent function of that intervention is where its brilliance lies.
Thank you.
So, and then the third piece is to engage in lifelong learning. We need to do a much better job at lifelong learning. As we enter this period of, we are in this period of enormous flux, our lifelong learning engine is broken. And in particular, we need to make sure that our schools provide people with positive experiences so that when we say to them, you need to go back to school to learn coding, and they think, I'm not going to go back to school where I was shamed for 12 years. These are 3 takeaways that I've thought of that I just would like to just wanted to share with you.
Ed, what's your advice?
Teachers have 180 days to develop a relationship with a child. There's no one better than that teacher to be their career developer, to be doing this work in the classroom. Career development is a human process. We've outsourced it to software systems, computer systems. Take a test, let's see what you're going to be. Go do this. Career development is a human process. It's about a conversation. It's about a relationship. It's about understanding the human. It's about identity. We don't have those conversations. There's dignity in all work. We've stigmatized labor. Shame on us. What I love about the RIASEC is that all humans are found within the RIASEC. In the meta-research around realistic, 85% of carpenters lead with R. If you have students who have leanings towards realistic, I bet their parents, many of their parents are saying, you need to be a computer scientist. You need to go into STEM. You need to go do this. I want to work with my hands. Well, let's open them to have a pathway to explore carpentry, the trades, whatever it might be. But it's not just one element. It's not just interests, although they have the highest correlation to career success, performance, and income. It's strengths, what are my unique talents, interests, what do I like to do, and thirdly, what are my workplace values? Don't be afraid to say the word values. And you can read all the wonderful research from vocational psychology and the work adjustment theory to understand the importance of those three elements in finding your place in the world.
Could you say a little bit more about this idea of dignity in work? Because this came up in your community conversations. Your community asked you as a school system to honor the dignity in all work.
They've told us. Our superintendent asked business owners, if you were running the schools, what would you do differently? And they said, well, you've stigmatized labor. Our community builds San Diego. Everything, all the cement, all the skyscrapers, everything, those are the wonderful, amazing people, men and women that come from our Cajon Valley, East County, and build San Diego. And we can't get projects done because we don't have enough talent. So can you stop stigmatizing labor and help introduce students to the great careers of construction, of HVAC, of welding, et cetera, auto, because we need those workers. And I know when I lived, my first 20 years was hiring talent. I didn't live in education. My team hired 20,000 people from around the globe, brought half of them to the United States to do work, computer science. As I see these people, many of them forced into their conveyor belt of education, miserable in their jobs, and I look at them, no one's ever talked to you and asked you, what do you want to do? What is your place in the world? I can tell it's not what you're doing today. And do we wonder why Gallup's research shows that only 33% of citizens here in the US are engaged in their work? Because we pathway them to an endpoint and they have very little voice in it.
Ed, I wonder if you could say a few words about the question about the liberal arts. You guys have started a community conversation about creating a high school. If I just heard your presentation and I'm a parent, I'm thinking, great, I'm going to get a job training high school. That's not what I want for my son or daughter, because I really value, I value the co-curriculars, the extracurriculars, I value liberal arts. Are you saying high school should just be job training?
No.
Or
no.
What would your high school look like?
It should be interest training. I'm preparing students to matriculate into a big picture model. And I have 3 children, and my oldest hates school. Hates it. He took a year of geometry, miserable. But imagine if my child, who loves to fish, and he stepped into 9th grade at a big picture school, and his advisor said, hey, Ryan, what if we helped you get an internship at Shimano Reels? And we teach you how math is associated with the business of fishing and marine. Let's get you out into the world of work and help you see how your talents, maybe we'll build fishing lures, or we'll build reels, or you'll design a new reel on CAD. Do you think Ryan Hidalgo would be engaged and want to stay in school? And he hates school. And so my heart breaks as I hear this model where we start from a place of interest with a child and develop that interest into the humanities, the arts, music. You don't think fishing boat captains listen to music? They do. How do we search the heart of each child and bring personalized learning to a place where learning is personal? And not just small group rotation and instructions, blended learning based on abilities, but based on who's the human that's sitting right in front of me today. And how do I help you develop to be your best possible self?
I want to give you a quick chance to plug the 2Gen work, and I'm thinking specifically of the comment about workforce development and how you think about assisting parents in your community.
I so appreciate this, and people ask me all the time, why are you starting in kindergarten? This is a problem, you're hurting kids. I go, the reason that we're starting in kindergarten is because it's the closest I will ever be to the parent. They physically have to deliver their child to me. And that is an opportunity for me to develop a relationship with the parent. And for many of our parents who are Syrian and Iraqi refugees, we haven't done a great job of resettling them here in our country. They think engineer, doctor, lawyer. And when we open up the world of Holland, of the Riasec to them, and they see this beautiful kaleidoscope of opportunities for their children, they want to step into that world, but they don't understand the language. Mark Savicka said that the self that a person makes themselves into is a function of language. If you don't have a word for it, you don't have it. They don't have a word for it yet. So we help them build a language around career development. So their child, their teacher, and the parent speak the language of Holland, and then we can show the journey, the possible journey for their child throughout all the years of education. So 2,000 parents have come in the last year, and guess what they're getting? Pure career development. Dr. Blustein's harvest of work is what our parents are getting. And they say, thank you for, no one has ever talked to me like this before. And so as we translate in Arabic and Farsi and Spanish, and they nod their head when they all say, Riasec. I don't speak Arabic or Farsi, but we speak the language of Holland. Not to pigeonhole or to stick someone into the wrong spot, but because we want what's best for their child based on who they are and who they might want to become. And for many of those parents, when they raise their hand to say, what do they need? They need a good job. So guess what? We're gifting that parent as well through the 2Gen strategy to help them find work.
Alisa, a few words of advice for educators and entrepreneurs here?
Decent work.
I'm on
Decent work.
I'm on the ed ship, but I think the Riasec, whether that's your standard or not, I do feel like that self-awareness is so critical, and many of us in this room probably didn't even get a chance to do that until your first really great job, where they do a lot of professional development and they help you, either it's a DISC assessment or a Riasec or whatever it is, and starting that young. And I couldn't agree more that the parents have to be on board. I mean, you have one issue in Cajon Valley where they're coming forward and saying, these labor jobs are important to us and we built the city. And in Massachusetts, a different environment. Everybody's expected to be an engineer or a doctor or an attorney or whatever. And if my kid came home and said, I want to be a plumber, I'd be like, what? And I think that there's getting the parents to understand and value their kids' interests. And having that connection. And so I love the idea that the students come home and they know their Riasec. And I do think that in order to get students to understand whether they want a vocational job or not, or career, they have to touch it. So one great way that schools do it, and Ed's all in, right? It's all in the district, and it starts in kindergarten. But for some practical things that schools that are dipping their toe in, maker spaces are really cool, because if you have a maker space, as elaborate as the tech might be in the room or not, it could be cardboard boxes, it allows students to build something. Every kid at home may not have 400 Lego sets at home, but they can sit in a makerspace and build something with cardboard, or touch some coding, or they can, express their interests in the way they solve a problem. So dare I say, the best thing about this conference is that room in the back, watching those kids do personalized learning on their own and come up with, is it an app? Is it a story? Is it a video? That enables them to determine whether or not they want a labor job, and they want to be plumbers, make a lot of money. And you can't find one necessarily when you need one. That starts early, and then they have confidence to go home and tell their parents, no, you know what, this is what I really want to do. But parents have to be on the same page, because parents bring their own bias.
That's right.
To their kids, and they're still the number one influencers of their kids, post-secondary and careers.
All right. If I have a few more minutes?
10.
Okay. I want to ask David a really hard public policy question. So we've been talking about advice for educators and entrepreneurs. What do we need to do as communities and countries to better create opportunities for work where workers have dignity and opportunity. What's the policy infrastructure that we need to be talking about?
I'll start first by affirming the International Labor Organization's decent work agenda. The ILO is an international organization that preceded the UN, started in 1919. Really important organization. Every country in the world has signed on to the decent work agenda. Decent work would include jobs that have adequate compensation, access to health care, time for rest and leisure, fit with one's values, with the values of the organization. Notice that decent work does not discuss the work necessarily being satisfying or rewarding. It's a kind of baseline of work. So there is a policy framework, and it's actually this item number 17 in the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which I know, Tom, you have written about as well, or it's in your materials. So the Sustainable Development Goals provide another rubric. Bringing it closer to home, we have a notable lack of attention to work-based issues in the current federal administration. I think that's an understatement. We do need a very sustained, thoughtful, systematic policy about work and labor that shouldn't come out of the Department of Commerce or Treasury. It needs to come from labor as a department, but also as a community, from the workers, from the ground up. That's what I tried to do in my book, is to give voice to people who are in the front lines, who are experiencing work. I have a lot of policy recommendations in my book, and I'm actually happy to speak about them after this, and I will be having a meet and greet at the Boston College table after this next session as well, so happy to talk more about that.
All right, I'll give you a chance.
So one of the things that I know is that the job that I had didn't exist when I was in school. And so what I'm thinking about is, what I'm not hearing in the conversation is talking about critical thinking skills and understanding how to adapt. So you're talking about these very specific vocations, but again, I don't know that they're going to exist for the students that you're working with now.
Okay, Ed, what's your take on that?
Actually, I've got, because I got two things I can say quickly. In the career counseling, career development literature, we have a deep investment in the concept of career adaptability. We're all about adaptability, having people be flexible and adapt to the world of change. Issue of critical thinking is also important in the work I've been writing about. I write extensively about critical consciousness. Critical consciousness is an amazing construct coming from Paulo Freire's work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but it also happens to have, and this was done by one of my students, a doctoral student at Boston College, critical consciousness is a major protective factor for people in their development, and is particularly important in their entree into adulthood and into the world of work.
Ed?
And for what it's worth, your career, if it's new, whatever the career is, I'm sure it's scored by the Department of Labor's website. You've maybe heard of the ONET before. Yeah, all the careers are aligned to the RISEC theme. So no matter what career is created between now and the end of time, it'll find a place on the Department of Labor's website, and it'll be scored aligned to the RISEC. So there'll be an alignment to it.
So I have another answer to your question, and I want to plug. David just talked about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's another beautiful problem framework that we should introduce kids to, and in the same way that Ed cycles his kids through 54 career learning opportunities, you can imagine between 6 and 12 cycling through the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. I suggested last week there really ought to be about 25 to fully embrace both the problems and the opportunities of the innovation economy. But cycling kids through the most important issues in the world, I call it the Earth Owner's Manual, and inviting them to think about the problems they want to solve in their life, whatever you call that job, I think is another way to do this. It's inviting kids into the big problem solving that we were talking about at the opening. So I hope you hear these folks trying hard to give kids specific learning experiences, but not pigeonholing them. Is that fair, Alisa?
Well, I feel like there's a push and pull with STEAM.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get tactical with, we're going to teach everyone to be a 3D printer or everyone's going to learn how to write code. There's, STEAM, it is 2020 and everything is done with technology. I mean, we have a partner school that, brought in a professional to talk about the fact that I can score music for Hollywood and I can live on the Cape because everything's done online. So there's an element of that in STEAM. But what I think the more beauty of these STEAM programs that we see being put in, whether it's a 45-day class or it's an after-school program, is that it teaches kids it's the problem solving and it's the ability to embrace technological change. Mm-hmm. So, and there's an element of I'm going to figure out that problem. So it's going to be I'm going to figure out how to get that next skill training. I mean, this isn't necessarily the talk about the adult skill training and to stay current, but there was a whole conversation on that. But I think it's really important that they're not afraid to try new things because I don't have the same job I had 25 years ago, and nor am I using the same skills I used 25 years. Trust me, I would never have been up on a stage like this 25 years ago. So I think it's that ability to adapt, and if we ingrain that into them early, and we give them the tools to say, it's all right, try the 3D printer, and you've learned how to solve the next problem for the next technology. So I think STEAM has a lot to do with it and help it, but I don't think we're asking to produce a bunch of people that are in 6th grade that code in a tool that exists today. It's just a means to it.
All right, next steps. Check out worldofwork.net, and come to our next session if you want to learn more. Buy David's book, The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty. We'll have a podcast out in a couple weeks on this topic. Check out the resources at asa.org. Do you want to do a plug for, you're going to have some cool resources coming out in a couple months?
Sure. We're in the process of launching a pretty extensive program that helps students and kids, direct-to-kid, outside of the classroom, explore their interests and talents and matching them with career opportunities in a broad spectrum, super high level. So we're super excited about that.
My closing hope for each of us is that in our own way that we can help to create schools that are alive with possibility. And I know we live in a scary, confusing world, but we also live at the coolest time in history, when things are getting better for more people, and where there has never been a better chance for young people to make a difference in the world. Young people can change the world. With the new tools that they have available to them, it's never been easier for a kid to build an app or start a business or launch a campaign or use open machine learning tools to tackle a local version of a global problem. So how can we work together to create schools that are really alive with that sense of possibility? So as some of you have urged, let's take a broader view of guidance and of our task of introducing young people to the world and do it in a way that invites them into difference making. Give our panelists a hand, please.